It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome to another Locked On NFL Sunday. You've got myself, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola, host of Locked On Saints, joined as always by my fantastic co-host, Cody Roark, at Cody Roark NFL on Twitter, host of Locked On Broncos. We're here to bring you all the biggest storylines throughout the week because, Cody, believe it or not, training camp is here. We made it, buddy. We did it. Here we are with all the storylines afoot. How are you, man?
I'm good, man. But Ross, I'm excited. We had training camp begin last week for all NFL teams. Everybody was at their team facilities. Obviously, there's some drama, some storylines that accompany that, but we actually get live physical football on television this week, Ross. It's been so long. It creeps up on us quickly. I'm so stoked about it, and I can't wait to break it down here with you today.
Yeah, we were talking earlier just before we went live about how, oh, wait, no, there's football like very, very soon as we get closer and closer to the Hall of Fame game. Today, we have a lot of storylines to talk through. Aaron Rodgers returning to the Green Bay Packers. What does it mean for the Packers, not only for this year, but moving forward? How did they get it done? We'll also take a quick look at Nick Chubb's new contract, a fantastic extension there in place for him with the Cleveland Browns. We're also going to be joined by a few of our friends here on the network. Tyler Rowland's coming through to talk a bit about Julio Jones joining the Tennessee Titans. We haven't seen him since the news broke while he was live here with us, and he had his really beautiful reaction to all of it. We're also going to be joined by Evan Sidery to talk a bit about the Colts and the Carson Wentz situation, and then Kevin Destreicher to talk about the Ravens going into training camp. All the great news coming out about some of those young receivers, and of course, the recent addition of Justin Houston. As we go along with today's episode, make sure that you chat along as well. Wherever it is that you're watching, you can participate in the chat. Let us know if you have any questions and comment along as we go up there. And we can, of course, always bring your comments up here at the bottom of the screen as well. So, Cody, let's go ahead and get started with the Green Bay Packers here. Aaron Rodgers, seems that the situation has finally started to thaw with him and the Packers, and then here he is now set to return and be the starting quarterback for the Packers week 1 in 2021.
Yeah, I mean, Rodgers is back, but, I think the vibe, we saw his press conferences, his media availability this week, and, we saw a very candid and very open Aaron Rodgers about the situation dating back to it. And I think he had a lot of valid complaints as to where things are at. He mentioned that, Green Bay, Wisconsin is not necessarily a vacation destination for many people. But you go back and look, I can bring up this because of the fact I've covered the Broncos when they had Peyton Manning. Rodgers alluded to the fact that there are players around the NFL who were open or who were willing to maybe take lesser money to come play and to help compete for a Super Bowl in Green Bay alongside Rodgers. And all he's ever wanted was some organizational input. He's wanted to be able to have a little bit of a say on personnel. We look at players like Tom Brady. We look at Patrick Mahomes. Those two quarterbacks right there, you know what they have? They have organizational input. How come Aaron Rodgers doesn't? I think that Rodgers' frustrations are very valid. You want to listen to your quarterback, specifically a guy who's the MVP, who put up unbelievable numbers last season, but now they've worked into some things into his contract that gives him a little bit more say as to maybe where he ends up. And 2021, Ross, I think, is his final year in Green Bay. All signs seem to indicate that, and hopefully the Packers will honor his wishes.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have the perfect person to help us decipher all of it in terms of how it is, what sort of adjustments were made to the contract to make all of it possible, and what the future looks like for Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. Let's welcome in Locked On Packers and Locked On Today host Peter Bukowski. Hey, Peter, how you doing this morning, buddy?
What's going on, guys? I am glad that our long national nightmare is over for the moment.
For the moment feels like a very key phrase there. Y'all can follow Peter on Twitter at Peter_Bukowski. Cody, you had some good thoughts about Aaron Rodgers there. How can Peter clarify some of these big question marks?
Yeah, Peter, going off on some of these contract mechanisms that were put into place. Obviously, one of them came from Pro Football Network chief NFL analyst Trey Wingo had said Randall Cobb was one of the things that Aaron Rodgers wanted. It happened. Cobb is back. Now, to the dismay of, I think, maybe the Packers organization, we obviously heard from the general manager this week who said that was a move to really make Rodgers happy. But, Peter, how do you feel about everything that's gone on this week?
How much time do you have, guys? So let me just, I want to say something up front about the Randall Cobb hiring, because there was a little bit of, I don't want to say drama, because it wasn't really drama, but there was a question asked in the press conference of Randall Cobb saying, how do you feel, or how does it make you feel that the GM doesn't want you here? Ooh. That was the way that it was phrased. Ooh. And I felt like that, number one, that's just like, maybe not the best way to ask someone a question, but it's also not what Brian Gutekunst said. Yeah. He said, this is a move we probably wouldn't have made if not for Aaron Rodgers. This is Aaron Rodgers' move. Mm-hmm. And there were some people who immediately were like, this is his way of covering his own ass and saying, okay, if this doesn't work out, if Cobb gets hurt, he only plays 4 games, then this is on Rodgers, right? That's not what I heard when I listened to the press conference. That was not the tone when I listened to what Brian Gutekunst said. He was giving credit, I think, to Aaron Rodgers. And to me, that was an audience of one. That was, Aaron, this is what you wanted. I'm giving you full credit. I'm not going to take any credit for this. This is your move. And aren't we playing nice? That was what I took. And I was a little, and unfortunately, there were a lot of fans that felt the same sort of way about what he said. So that is just my reading of it. He very well have intended it the way that he said it, or the way that it just sort of like looks like on paper, maybe. Sure. That was not the inference that I took. The other takeaway, you asked me just like what my impression of, is that Aaron Rodgers didn't get very much, because the timeline for his departure really hasn't changed. When he was drafted, he had 2 material years left on a contract that is going to take him through 2023. But the fact that the money looks the way that it does, originally he only had a $17 million dead cap hit if he were traded next offseason in the old contract. So as soon as they drafted Jordan Love, it's like, all right, he's got 2 more years here, probably. And if he plays well, maybe 3. But the 2023 year was always a fake year. There's really no money in there that matters, essentially. So what the restructure does is only makes that eventual trade that is, as Cody said, likely going to happen in 2022, potentially to the team Cody covers. It's going to make it hurt Green Bay a little bit more. Now instead of a $17 million dead cap hit, it's more like 26. Yeah. And that's a lot of money. The Eagles just ate a similar number to deal Carson Wentz. But it would be a lot. It would be a lot for the Packers, who already have a messy cap situation in 2022. Beyond that, yeah, he got Randall Cobb. That's great for him. I don't know that it materially changes the fortunes of the Packers, who are already going to be probably a second contender to Tampa Bay. And I think Tampa and Green Bay, they stand, to me at least, head and shoulders above the rest of the teams in the NFC as we sit here today. Maybe Trey Lance sets the world on fire, and that's a different conversation. But Tom Silverstein, who's a longtime beat writer in Milwaukee for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, said this, like, I don't really know what's different other than now everyone gets to see, okay, Rodgers and the Packers are going to split. To me, it's like being in a relationship that the other person is going to end and saying, no, I want to break up. And I think that is ultimately what happened here. But now there's rumblings all of a sudden. Ian Rappaport hinted at this yesterday on NFL Network that, hey, Rodgers, when he said he wanted to finish his career in Green Bay, he really meant it. So who knows? Who knows? If they go out and win a Super Bowl, can he walk away, guys? I don't know.
Yeah, right.
It's a good question, but thankfully you saved Randall Cobb from the Houston Texans. That's I think there's some excitement there. But yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think the situation is very fluid right now. But yeah, I mean, this is potentially the last dance, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. And speaking of the last dance, I have to ask a little bit too, just in terms of the post that went down between both Aaron Rodgers and Davante Adams, the last dance post. Obviously, this affects Davante Adams, who cut off long-term extensions with the team, but certainly this helps to pacify that situation, at least getting through 2021.
It was not a coincidence that within minutes of the news breaking that Rodgers was going to be coming back, or at least he was telling people that he was coming back, it was within minutes of the news breaking that they were reworking the contract. Mm-hmm. Adam Schefter comes out, talks are back on the table, Davante Adams extension, all this stuff. Now he says, I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to think about it until after the season. But guess what? That's not the same as we're not talking, right?
Right.
I'm going to let my agent handle the negotiations. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to play football. And that's one of the things about Davante Adams is he has never been, that kind of receiver.
Right.
He has never been disruptive about targets, about touches, about game plan. The closest it came was he was frustrated in 2018 when he did not play in a Week 17 game, when he was hurt, but could have played in a Week 17 game that did not matter, when he had a chance to break the franchise record for, I believe it was receptions. And that was frustrating. And there may have been a bonus associated with that, if my memory serves. So that was like, but he didn't pop off on Instagram. It was nothing like that.
Right.
He has always been the consummate professional team player, going out of his way to help guys on the sidelines, working routes, working releases. But he's also an honest guy, which is good, because he went in front of the media this week and said, if it's not for the top of market, I'm out, basically. Like, I'm not taking a hometown discount to stay here.
Right.
And what was really interesting, how transparent this process has been, Brian Gutekunst said, yeah, we think he deserves top of market money. We just disagree on what that means. And that has been something that we've been talking about. These people that cover the team and cover the NFL, that the DeAndre Hopkins extension is looming here. Technically, he's getting $27 million per year, except he's only counting $27 per million on the cap in that contract one time.
Yeah.
It's significantly less essentially every other season, because he got an extension. They put money into years that he already had on his deal. And it was not a real contract, the way that Davante Adams is going to get a new deal starting in 2022.
Right.
The Packers are saying, look, if you want 23 million, 24 million, you want the Amari Cooper deal, that is, the next, sort of big deal that happened, we can do that. But the DeAndre Hopkins deal is fake.
Right.
Here's the problem. When Laramie Tunsil got, not a fake deal, but when he blew away the market, when Houston just gave him the bag, and it was, I think, $5 million or something crazy like that, higher than the next highest paid offensive tackle. Like, they did not have to give him what they gave him. The Packers used that as a benchmark and beat it with David Bakhtiari's number. And Trent Williams, I think, beat it by $1,000 or something when he signed his extension right after that. And David Bakhtiari had some thoughts on that. But so this is the problem for the Packers, that even when these benchmarks are potentially unreasonable, and we just saw it, they've said, well, if you're the best, we're going to give you that money. This is the problem that they're facing right now. So you hope that the Rodgers situation makes it easier, but he may just as easily say, who's going to pay me next year? Vegas, and I can go back and play with Derek Carr and hang with your boy Q, and it's going to be great. So, we'll see what happens there. But you're right. The trickle down effects of the Rodgers thing they're enormous.
So I think that at that point, the big thing is just going to be the future of the Packers. And of course, the best way to keep up with all of that and to see how all of this plays out as things roll along is to check out Peter, both on Twitter at Peter_Bukowski, and also, of course, with Locked On Packers. And don't miss Locked On Today, as well as Peter keeps you up to date with everything going on around the world of sports. A lot of Olympic coverage going on right now. One of my favorite listens every single morning. Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We got to move on through today's show, but what an interesting sort of situation unfolding and potentially pacifying a bit for you here ahead of the 2021 season. So maybe you could just focus on football for a second.
For now.
Appreciate you, buddy. Thanks for coming through.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how the whole situation goes out this year. I think some of the post-game press conferences, if something goes wrong, I think might be a little bit more interesting if they decide to kick a field goal again. We might get a more openly candid Rodgers. This might be Rodgers' I don't care season. Like, very well may be that way. So,
which could be both great for Packers fans and absolutely horrific for Packers fans. I think it can go either way, right? An uninhibited Aaron Rodgers can be a lot of fun, or it could be Ryan Fitzpatrick. We'll find out. All right, so as we move on with today's episode, we're going to go from one piece of quarterback news to some of the kind of biggest moments when it came to the Locked On NFL Sunday show. First of all, we are going to talk a little bit more about Aaron Rodgers down the road because somebody might be affected by this Aaron Rodgers situation moving forward. We'll talk about that a little bit later. First, I want to go to our guy, Tyler Rowland, who's asking for a little bit of grace today, but he's here with us for the from the Locked On Titans podcast on Twitter at Tic Tac Titans. Tyler, how you feeling, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. I thought, excuse me, I thought getting up early on a Sunday morning, mowing the grass, feeling good and productive, hopping on, talking some football was a good idea. And then the allergies hit, but I'm fighting through. I'm questionable, but I'm gonna make a play out there for my team. So how are you guys doing this morning?
Good, man.
Good. Tyler, the last time we had you here, we had live instant reaction. Julio Jones was traded to the Tennessee Titans. The storylines have written themselves so far this offseason. Training camp is now open for the team. What's the vibe right now over there at Titans camp as the Titans now look to maybe continue to push forward to maybe get back to the AFC Championship game this year?
Well, I think for a team like the Titans, who's filled with a ton of veterans, I think the key is, as for most teams around the NFL, stay healthy. Just stay healthy. Keep all of your significant players, your starters, your key role players, go in with a clean bill of health into the season and then see where the chips fall. But the big thing coming out of Titans camp, although Julio Jones was the story last time I was on here, what an incredible day. Won't forget that. But the real big story is A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown played last year with 2 injured knees. It was an underreported story, something that wasn't talked about a lot. I mean, A.J. Brown made a habit of coming out the first series, making a catch, getting hurt, limping off to the sidelines, and then coming back out and dropping 100 and a touchdown on people. So this year, hopefully, he doesn't have to deal with that. He can be fully healthy, and reports out of camp, it's just rave reviews. He looks like a totally different level of player than anyone else out there. Julio Jones, speaking of him, he's been mostly limited throughout camp. Mike Vrabel, being a former player, very focused on player health. He knows that a guy like Julio Jones doesn't need to be out there during 100-degree weather on the first week of camp with no pads on. He's going to be fine. So appreciate that perspective and that philosophy from Mike Vrabel there. But the big story here is A.J. Brown just looks like a totally different level of player than anybody else out on the field.
Not a bad situation to be in, right? I mean, to have too many of these guys out there that could end up producing that way. Outside of A.J. Brown and Julio Jones, who else has been standing out in training camp that Tennessee Titans fans and fans from outside of the organization need to know of? Because I've seen a familiar name pop up here over the last couple of days personally.
Yeah, and it's somebody from an area you might be familiar with, but just a 7th-round rookie wide receiver out of LSU, Racey McMath, has been the belle of the ball early on, and obviously pads haven't gone on yet. Sure. A guy with his physical gifts, he's 6'2", he's incredibly fast, has really good ability to go up and get the ball over top of people, and he's been making wow highlights basically. Throughout the start of camp. But the pads come on next week, and that's really when you kind of separate those guys who look good in the shorts with the guys who can really get it done when it matters. So a 7th-round rookie. Now, here's the key, though, and he came from LSU. It's well documented, the fantastic lineage of wide receivers coming out of LSU the last few years. You look at Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson in the last 2 drafts, just to name a few. Even a guy like Terrence Marshall, who's getting a lot of rave reviews out of Panthers camp right now. He had to be behind a very talented depth chart. So it's possible that Racey McMath could be a better pro than he was a college player because of that situation. But either way, he's supposed to be an ace on special teams. That's why he was drafted in the 7th round rather than being a priority free agent after the draft. But on the flip side, a guy who made some starts for the Titans last year on defense at cornerback, who's kind of a 4th or 5th cornerback right now, it's a great position for the Titans to be in, is Breon Borders. Like I said, he made some starts for the Titans last year, had some good moments, had some bad moments too, specifically in that Browns game that the Titans got drubbed on, that I was completely wrong on, by the way. I got to take my medicine for that. But either way, Breon Borders and Racey McMath, who are low on the depth chart at wide receiver and cornerback, but they've still been standouts early in the first week of training camp.
Love it. One question I have for you, Tyler, too, the biggest offseason need, in my opinion, outside of, maybe getting one of those wide receivers like Julio Jones for the Titans, was to improve in the secondary. Last year, banged up, young, What's the talk right now? What's the vibe so far, Camp? You did mention, yes, the pads haven't come on yet, but the secondary with guys like Caleb Farley who were drafted, what does the Titans secondary look like so far heading into training camp and obviously preseason action just being 12 days away?
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, there is a football game this week. I mean, yes, let's go. But either way, I think the big thing here is the Titans went with a youth movement. They said, we're going to put our money in the pass rush up front on the defensive line, and we're going to go youth on the back end. Last year's second-round pick, Christian Fulton from LSU, has to improve and has to stay healthy and be a key cog in this secondary. They drafted 2 guys early on in the draft. Caleb Farley in the first round, who is still on the non-football injury list, which it is a football injury, as we know, but that's guys who got hurt in their last year of college go on NFI. So he's still on NFI, expecting him back before the regular season, but don't want to put any pressure on a rookie. Want him to be healthy long-term. Elijah Molden, though, who was picked in the 3rd round out of Washington, a prototypical slot corner, a guy who's raved about his football IQ, his intelligence out on the field. I think he'll play a bigger role than people are expecting. So those 3 young guys have to make an impact, but the vet, the KG vet, Janoris Jenkins, Jackrabbit Jenkins, if he heard this, he'd be mad. Jackrabbit out there. He's had, I believe, 3 interceptions throughout camp, had 2 yesterday on Saturday in practice against Ryan Tannehill. He has been setting the tone as a vet. He's just known for his press man coverage. And the Titans wanted to get guys in the secondary who can do that this year rather than having kind of a mixture of guys. And that goes to new starting safety Amani Hooker as well, who had 4 interceptions last year as he kind of took over that role from Kenny Vaccaro. He's had a few interceptions in camp as well and played very, very well. So the Titans are hoping that having more youth in the secondary will result in better play in the secondary. But I think really they put so much money in the pass rush. They're hoping that the pass rush and up front with Bud Dupree and Danico Autry and Jeffrey Simmons, Harold Landry, those guys can have a much better year, which will help that young secondary out.
Absolutely. And I think that having Janoris Jenkins as a part of that young secondary is such a good compliment because he brings film study, he brings football IQ. He's one of the best to, get these interceptions and take them to the house, all of that. He just brings so much of that. Tyler, we have just a little bit of extra time here with you. So I want to roll one more question your way. And everybody, you can follow Tyler on Twitter at TicTacTitans and check him out every Monday through Friday over on the Locked On Titans podcast. Within the division right now, the Indianapolis Colts are going to be visiting with Evan Sidery here in a little bit. Carson Wentz having this injury news that has popped up, this foot injury, out indefinitely, expected to miss at least the preseason. How would it affect the Tennessee Titans, the AFC South division, if Carson Wentz were to end up missing time during the regular season with this injury?
Well, I think, and maybe, some people will see this as hate for Carson Wentz, but I think the Colts, regardless, are going to be a decent team. Frank Reich is just the kind of coach who can get the best out of his quarterback, get the best out of the offensive plan. They still have a stellar offensive line, a good running game, good stable of backs. I'm not as high on the pass catchers as some people seem to be with Michael Pittman and Paris Campbell. Heard some negative reports about T.Y. Hilton. So I think what we're going to get from the Colts on offense with Carson Wentz or without is going to be decent enough. That great defense that they have will keep them in it. I think a floor for them is probably 7-10 or 8-9 at the minimum. They're still going to be a competitive team all season regardless. But with the news of Carson Wentz, I think the biggest factor for the Titans is they play the Colts in week 3. And it's a home game for the Titans, but the Colts have always pretty much been the Titans' nightmare in the division. So having a game early on in the season when maybe a guy like Jacob Eason, Sam Ehlinger, even a Brett Hundley, who they signed recently, having those guys who are still learning the system, young guys, I think that would obviously make it an easier game to win for the Titans, and getting a division win against a team you've struggled against historically early on, that would obviously help the Titans' playoff chances, just realistically speaking. But ultimately, the injury doesn't sound like it's a season ender for Carson Wentz at this time. We don't know, but that's, there's some optimism there. And I think any Titans fan or the Titans team themselves, although you take the wins any way you can get them in the NFL, but I think they'd want to play the Colts with Carson Wentz at least once to, you want to play the best. Iron sharpens iron. And for the division crown, which it probably will be, you want to beat the full-strength Colts at least one time during the season.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I'll tell you another team that's going to be very invested in this whole storyline is the Philadelphia Eagles, because they have a potential first-round pick hanging in the balance with all of this. Tyler, we appreciate you so much for coming through, man. Once again, y'all can find Tyler over at Locked On Titans every Monday through Friday and on Twitter at TicTacTitans. Thanks for coming through, man. We'll see you again here soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Football is back, guys. Rejoice.
Hey, we're here. Gotta love it, man. I look, I think the Tennessee Titans are going to be one of those teams this year that, I mean, they've done a lot of really, really fantastic work over the course of the offseason. And if Carson Wentz were to either miss any time early on in the season, like Tyler said, it doesn't seem to be a season-threatening type of thing, but if he were to proceed past the preseason into the early season, or it were to kind of reoccur throughout the season, I mean, it's a pretty open pathway for Tennessee because there's not any competition in that division otherwise.
Yeah, when I've had this conversation as well, you should see how many Titans fans got upset at me for saying, hey, we simply don't know what the Colts could be with Carson Wentz. He could make them ultra competitive in that division. So really the division, I think, boils down between those two teams. I look at the Colts defensively. I think they have a very great potential young defense. They have some strong players. Obviously, Darius Leonard at linebacker. That back end of that secondary is very talented. I think that they're in a good place there. It's really dependent upon the offense. Can they, find that balance? Can Carson Wentz have that confidence that he simply lacked in Philadelphia? If he has that, and if he's healthy, I think that the Colts and the Titans, they will compete against each other for the top spot. And it's not laughable to say that the Colts have a chance at winning the division. But then again, football fans are very passionate about their team, Ross. So that's where I'm at there. But yeah, no, it's an intriguing storyline to follow. We're actually going to get to the Indianapolis Colts coming up here in just a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. And, just to kind of harp a little bit more on this whole idea too, is it makes it tough to project anything within it's tougher to project a division whenever there's a new quarterback. And when you look at the AFC South, there's potentially 3 different quarterbacks that are going to be starting this year, at least 2, but potentially 3 than what we saw last year. And that makes it even tougher to kind of project at this point moving forward, right? Like Carson Wentz, regardless of whether or not he's ready for the season, that's a new starting quarterback there for the Indianapolis Colts. But as we've discussed before, if there's any place that Carson Wentz is going to find his success and revamp his career, it feels like it's with Frank Reich and the Indianapolis Colts. And to help us talk about that is our good friend Evan Sidery from the Locked On Colts podcast at Locked On Colts on Twitter. Hey, buddy, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, guys. How you doing?
Doing great, man. Appreciate you being here.
Good. Evan, good morning, my friend. Obviously, let's get into the biggest news story so far this week regarding the Indianapolis Colts. Carson Wentz dealt with a foot injury towards the end of one of the training camp practices. Conflicting reports out there initially, but the expectations that he's expected to miss at least the preseason. Is there any kind of concern that this may linger into the regular season for Carson Wentz?
Absolutely. I mean, we all know the injury history of Carson Wentz. I don't think he's played a full 16 games in his career so far. So having this happen in the first 2 days of training camp is just a really bad start for this Colts team, especially for Carson Wentz, who needs to get some chemistry with these guys. He's doing a new offense as well. And we already know Frank Reich has actually missed the first few days of camp with COVID-19. So it's just been a really rough start for the Colts as far as chemistry goes, and especially for Carson Wentz, where it was a truncated OTA period for the Colts. Actually had one of the lightest periods of any team in the NFL. It was only about a week or so long. There was no contact at all. Training camp was supposed to be a time where they could really ramp it up and get things going before the season started. But now with Wentz missing all of training camp, all preseason, potentially games into the regular season, it really could be a situation where the Colts are in a spot, like really their first 5 games of the season. It's a murderous row of teams in the first 5 weeks of the season. Having Wentz try to gain that chemistry in that time frame is a really tough spot for the Colts to be in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really tough space to be. And as you mentioned, to end up having lost him this early in training camp, there's no opportunity to build any type of chemistry or anything that you can kind of capitalize on once he returns. You got the Seahawks, Rams, Titans within the division, Dolphins, and Ravens in the first 5 games. As you mentioned, a very, very tough stretch. If Carson Wentz is out at any point during the regular season early on, who do the Colts turn to at quarterback?
4th round pick in 2020, Jacob Eason. And he currently right now is getting the starting reps for the Colts. He has the traits, obviously. He has a really strong arm. He had one of the strongest arms in the class. But the big worry with Eason just was the processing, the overall quarterback kind of like be able to read the line of scrimmage, read the plays, be able to make some accurate throws when need be in the tight windows. He can make throws on any blade of grass, but the big question with Easton is just everything else in the quarterback position. And so far in camp, he's been struggling. I mean, maybe it's a little bit of not a surprise because he's going against a top 10 defense, but he's thrown 1 touchdown, 3 picks in the last 2 days of camp so far with the one. So you'll have to see how he adjusts to that. But having Easton in his first career snaps in the NFL going against those teams you just mentioned, Ross, in the first 5 weeks, that's a spot the Colts can't be in. They just signed Brett Hundley, a veteran who was with the Cardinals last year, but I would still lean, even with Hundley signing, that they roll with Easton and see what happens there.
Yeah.
I want to pivot to the defense. Obviously, you mentioned a potential top 10 unit there. They have a lot of talent across the board, from the linebacking unit, from the pass rush to Forrest Buckner this year coming back. Obviously, relatively healthy. I want to talk about Julian Blackmon, obviously a second-year player. What are the expectations for him in this secondary? Because he's been a fun player to watch. I remember there was a gripe coming out of the NFL draft before he's drafted that, Pac-12 players don't tend to last too long in the NFL. I never understood where that came from, because Julian Blackmon was such a damn good player. And I was really impressed watching him as a rookie last season with the Colts.
I'm right there with you, Cody. I love Julian Blackmon. The Colts really do as well, maybe more so than me and you, because Chris Bauer mentioned during his draft press conference afterwards that he sees all-pro potential in Julian Blackmon. He thinks he could take a leap this year to all-pro. And I could easily see, he was a ball hawk in the first 6 weeks of the season once Malik Hooker went down. Kind of tapered off a little bit once the season ended. But I think Blackman's a guy, especially with this pass rush now, he's got more opportunities to get that ball in the secondary with some opportunities where the quarterback's going to rush from throws. He's a great tackler as well. I could easily see a situation where Blackmon establishes himself as a top 5 free safety in the NFL. At this young of age, he's a really special player, and to add him alongside already a young core on defense the Colts have established, the Colts have a guy in the back end there that could really be a dominant presence.
Evan, we got a little bit of extra time here with you, so I want to ask you about some contract talk really quickly. Fred Warner getting the big-time inside linebacker contract in San Francisco. How does that affect the Indianapolis Colts and their looming contract extension with a player like Darius Leonard?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know why the Colts and Leonard are kind of still dragging their feet on this, but I do eventually see a resolution coming before the preseason even begins for the Colts. Leonard is probably going to get above Fred Warner's annual value. I would guess around $19 and $19.5 million per year. Mm-hmm. I know Adam Schefter tweeted, or I think it was last week, where it's like a 4-year deal with $19+ million per year. Maybe they're just hammering out the semantics behind the scenes there, but I can't imagine they'll get this done with Darius Leonard. He's one of the most impactful linebackers. He's really good at getting his hands around the ball constantly, makes impact plays almost every single Sunday. I think Leonard's a guy, you lock him up for 4 years. You talk about it again in 3 or 4 years, but Leonard's a guy where he's the backbone of this defense. He's the backbone of this team already in his 3rd year. So I think Leonard's a guy you have to lock up, and I think the Colts and Leonard's camp are just kind of hammering out behind the scenes here a little bit. But that's going to get done for sure.
Gotta love having a playmaker in the middle of your defense, huh?
Oh, absolutely. We just talked about Blackmon. You have Leonard. Right. You have DeForest Buckner. There's a lot of guys here. The Colts, maybe I'm a little bit more bullish than most, but I think this Colts defense, it can be really, really good this year.
Yeah. No, they have all the potential to. You just mentioned 3 impact players at 3 levels of the defense. That is, not many NFL teams have that luxury of having that type of talent. So looking forward to seeing how the Colts do this upcoming season.
Absolutely. Yeah. They're going to be really, especially with this Carson Wentz news now, one of the most intriguing teams to follow in the next couple months.
Yeah, it's going to be big. It's going to be big. Well, we appreciate you, buddy, for coming through and joining us here this Sunday morning to keep up with all of the excitement and all the intrigue around the Indianapolis Colts. The absolute best way to do it is Monday through Friday over at Locked On Colts and on Twitter at Locked On Colts. Fantastic Twitter follow. Doesn't need to be a Colts fan. Just great stuff coming from Evan every single day. We appreciate you, buddy. Thanks for coming through.
Appreciate you guys. Have a good one.
You too.
Tell you what, Ross, that Colts team, like I said, defensively, and one thing that they could do if Carson Wentz's injury lingers into the regular season, you know what they really need to build their offensive identity upon? Running the football, right? Because that defense,
Jonathan
I think
Taylor,
that defense will be,
baby.
Exactly. That defense will be really damn talented. So if you can have the ability to where you can run the ball effectively, which the Colts have the capability of doing, if you could run the ball effectively, control the time of possession, and then your defense can come out, be aggressive and smothering, you're going to be in a good situation, especially if your defense can generate a couple of takeaways. You put yourself in a position to win games. Everybody's always talking about quarterback this, quarterback that. Yes, one of the most important positions in football, but there are ways to help maybe lessen the blow if your starting quarterback does go down. So we'll see if Wentz can heal up before the regular season. The hope is that he can, because Ross, you and I had talked about it here. We really felt like maybe he could have a bounce back season in a big way for the Colts, because we feel like he can amplify them if, in fact, he can get over some of those mental hurdles that he dealt with at Philadelphia. It's a different environment, probably a better offensive line in Indy than it was in Philly, but still a lot of questions remain.
Yeah, absolutely. And, look, as two guys that cover teams that have changes potentially hanging at the quarterback position, certainly in New Orleans, a bit of a battle brewing, of course, in Denver with Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock. What have these teams invested in? They've invested in offensive line. They've invested in the run game. Javonte Williams coming in out of North Carolina for Denver. Yeah. Of course, Alvin Kamara in New Orleans, as well as Latavius Murray. They just also brought in Devontae Freeman because, hey, why not? He doesn't count against your cap. See what he does. And then they've invested in defense, both of these teams. Now, I think the Saints have more question marks on defense than the Broncos do, but it just goes to show you that that's where teams tend to focus when it comes to changes at quarterback, young quarterbacks or brand new quarterbacks coming in any situation. And I think you would expect to see the same thing from the Indianapolis Colts. I'm right there with you. And I do want to mention, too, you've got two players in Paris Campbell as well as Michael Pittman who can do a ton of damage close to the line of scrimmage and extend plays for you after the catch, which, of course,
you still got T.Y. Hilton.
And you still got T.Y.
So
you still got T.Y.
I like that receiving unit. I think it's going to be very underrated. T.Y.'s dealt with some injuries in the last couple of years, but look, I think that when he's healthy, he's one of the best deep ball threats you can get to, one of the most reliable probably. You need a big play on third down, I'm going to T.Y. So there's a lot of excitement, and specifically, too, I'm excited to see how this Colts team can run things with or without Wentz. But yeah, man, that 5-game start to the season for them, it is brutal. It is probably the toughest schedule really right now in the NFL.
It's really, really tough. I mean, that's a rough sort of gauntlet to open up with and everything. And of course, now to be, in the midst of this Carson Wentz injury makes it look even tougher and more intimidating than it was before. We're going to be joined here in about 5 minutes or so by Kevin Ostreicher of the Locked On Ravens podcast. We're going to talk about that great wide receiver core in Baltimore, and of course, their fantastic quarterback Lamar Jackson and their new addition Justin Houston. But before we get to that, we wanted to carve out this space to have a little conversation about the biggest news from yesterday, as far as I'm concerned. Nick Chubb getting a big time extension in Cleveland, or at least this week, excuse me. But 3 years, $36.6 million extension that goes on top of some money that was already there and everything, but this really helps to bolster him, give him this big time pay raise. And of course, for the Cleveland Browns, it locks him into their system for the next at least 2 years in terms of the guaranteed money, but he still gets to pop out of Cleveland, potentially at the top of his game if he stays healthy. How do you feel about this contract for both the player and team?
Well, I tell you what, Chubb's a hell of a player. Probably, in my opinion, the best running back in the National Football League. I think it wouldn't.
You should have said that when Tyler was still here.
You can make the argument, right? I think, yes, Derrick Henry, the bulkier guy, obviously he's going to be the guy that's going to run heavy in between the tackles to the outside. He's going to get 300 carries a season. But Chubb, in my opinion, probably the most well-rounded running back in the NFL from a rushing standpoint, from a receiving standpoint, and from a pass protection standpoint. He is the one player to me that stands out. Obviously, he's younger too than Derrick Henry. But the thing is he makes that Browns offense even more electrifying. This was a move that they needed to have happen, and now they have him, and obviously they still have Kareem Hunt behind him. That is a dynamic running back duel right there, a 1-2 punch between smash and dash. I mean, we go back to the old Panthers days, going through that with Stewart and Williams. I mean, this is legitimately where we're at right now with the Cleveland Browns, who have such a talented roster, and obviously entering another year with Kevin Stefanski as head coach, which in my opinion has done so well for the culture of the Browns and has done really well for Baker Mayfield. So let's see if Baker Mayfield can take the next step. But hey, it sure as hell helps when you secure one of your best running backs that you've had in quite some time to a little bit of a longer term contract. Browns are in a good place right now.
Yeah, and I love this contract for the team because it protects you against all of the sort of concerns that could potentially come with extending and paying a running back. Yeah. It's a short-term extension. In terms of guaranteed money, you're out from under it after 2 years of the new deal as opposed to the full 3 years, so you're not fully locked in there. And then for Nick Chubb, it gives him an opportunity to hit the market for another contract if he stays healthy, either with the Cleveland Browns or potentially elsewhere, to be able to capitalize on, opportunity and value based upon him being potentially still at his prime in that case. So I love this deal for both sides. I think that the sort of duality of both he and Kareem Hunt is so interesting because Nick Chubb can catch out of the backfield. Kareem Hunt can fight through congestion at the goal line. It's such a good tandem, the two of them, to have them together. And then you have still this offense that's coming together, this offensive line that's steadily improved. Baker Mayfield, who's willing to take some shots downfield, but can also operate close to the line of scrimmage. Jarvis Landry's still there and healthy and ready to roll, and he kind of turned into the lead guy there. Hollywood Higgins. And then, of course, you have OBJ coming back to this lineup and hopefully able to stay healthy. You talked about the dynamic backfield. This helps to add to an entirely dynamic offense as a whole, as well, and a defense that should be getting healthy as well. Maybe they didn't make the biggest moves in free agency, but John Johnson was a huge one for them to get him there as their new safety. And then you basically look at players returning from injury as a huge free agency win for them going into 2021 as well.
Yeah, not to mention the additions of Greg Newsome, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. I mean, that defense right there, Jadeveon Clowney, Myles Garrett, who, look, in my opinion, I think Myles Garrett could be a favorite this year, at least in the preseason, to be a potential defensive player of the year candidate. Sure. He had a very dominant year last year. But you know what, Ross? If I'm the Cleveland Browns, I'm going 21 personnel all the time. I'm getting Kareem Hunt and Chubb on the field at the same time alongside with OBJ, Jarvis Landry. But then you mentioned those guys behind him, Hollywood Higgins, man. They have so much talented depth. Cleveland is going to be a team to watch this upcoming season. I know that the AFC North is one of the most competitive divisions in football. I know we're going to talk about the Ravens here in a moment, but look, it's hard to ignore that Cleveland right now, at least in my opinion, Ross, they have to be the favorites on paper to win the division.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, it's going to be a tough division to win because you have both of those teams. You also have the Steelers, who are looking to make what I would assume would be one more run with Big Ben Roethlisberger. Yeah, the fourth one more run. And then you're looking at the Cincinnati Bengals, who, if they can keep Joe Burrow from getting hit 32 times in a season or sacked 32 times in a season, might be able to win a few more games with him under center. But they'll need to keep him healthy first. But one of the sort of highlights that we've seen from this division year after year, and the consistency, and one of the best drafting teams in the NFL, as far as I'm concerned, has been the Baltimore Ravens. And to help us talk about the Baltimore Ravens throughout training camp, the new weapons there, and of course the big new signing with Justin Houston this week, I want to welcome in our good friend Kevin Ostreicher, who you can follow on Twitter at KOstreicher34 and catch every Monday through Friday on Locked On Ravens. Kevin, thanks for being here with us, buddy. How are you?
Yeah, guys, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. Yes, it's an exciting time now with Justin Houston in Baltimore for sure.
Gotta love it.
Well, we'll get to Justin Houston here in a little bit, but, Kevin, I want to start things off talking about Baltimore Ravens training camp, Lamar Jackson. There's a lot of question. I think there's a lot riding on the line this season for Lamar Jackson just in general, but the Ravens went out, they got him some more wide receivers, and I hear that Rashad Bateman has been tearing it up in practice. Can you tell us a little bit about the Ravens rookie this upcoming season so far through camp?
Yeah, Cody, he's been great so far, and this was a guy a lot of people wanted in Baltimore before the draft. He was linked to the team, but most had him going, like Cleveland, Indianapolis, that early 20 range. But then, he slips to Baltimore. Baltimore takes advantage. And just yesterday during the open stadium practice, we saw him burn Marlon Humphrey down the sideline. Marlon Humphrey, maybe Raven bias gets in the way here, but I think he's a top 3 cornerback. So you look at what he's doing already. Obviously, he has a long way to go. He's not a finished product yet. He's through like 4 training camp practices. But what you have in Bateman is someone who can play both on the outside and in the slot, which is valuable because last year the Ravens didn't really have any pure outside guys. They had to use Marquise Brown out there, and Bateman gives them a technician as a route runner, good hands, has deceptive speed. He's not gonna burn you or anything, but it's not like he's technically this Marquise Brown type player, but he can still use some long speed to beat you. So I'm excited for Bateman in Baltimore. I know a lot of people are as well. Putting him with Brown and Sammy Watkins, and obviously the improved offensive line is going to help Lamar Jackson out when he gets to camp and he gets chemistry with these guys. Marlon Humphrey said before training camp that he didn't really know a lot about Bateman, but then he saw him work through practice, and he told Eric DeCosta, the Ravens general manager, that, yeah, all right, we got a good one in Rashad Bateman. So I'm excited for what Bateman brings to the table for sure.
Gotta love that. Once again, Kevin Ostreicher at KOstreicher34 on Twitter. Kevin, look, the addition of Justin Houston, I saw you were very excited about it on Twitter yesterday. Once again, great Twitter follow. Make sure you check him out. What does this mean to the Baltimore Ravens, who just can't stop being great on defense?
Yeah. They're known as a defensive team for sure. And now that Lamar Jackson is in town, they kind of have an offense to keep up with it. I know that, for example, like looking at fantasy football, 3-4 years ago, nobody wanted anything to do with the Baltimore Ravens on offense. It was all about their defense. But in terms of what Justin Houston in particular brings, the Ravens had not a ton of pass rushing prowess on their roster, before Houston was signed. They lost Matthew Judon, Yannick Ngakoue, Jihad Ward. The team had 39 sacks as a team last year, and they had 12 of them combined. So it's not like this huge statistical number. Judon led the whole team with sacks and 6 last year. So, for him, it's difficult because the Ravens wanted to retain Matthew Judon, but
Sure.
they just didn't have the money. The Ravens have a lot of money they're going to have to commit to Lamar Jackson. They've already committed to Ronnie Stanley and Marlon Humphrey long term. So getting Justin Houston on a 1-year up to $4 million deal, I mean, that base salary comes in at just under $1.1 million. And I know there were people, especially in Ravens circles, who were expecting a lot more than that for Houston. And the reason he hadn't signed is because the money, he wanted more. The Ravens couldn't pay it. So the whole thing kind of held up with that, and maybe a couple other things as well. But Justin Houston apparently wanted to be in Baltimore for months. He visited a few months ago, and John Harbaugh, after the practice yesterday, said, yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with him. And what he brings, 97.5 career sacks in 10 seasons is no joke.
Right.
And what you have now is he complements the other pieces on the defense because, for example, edge rusher Tyus Bowser, great dropping back into coverage. Rookie Odafe Owe, great against the run. And it's kind of like that where they had guys who were great against the run, great in coverage, but not really pass rushers. And now they add Justin Houston to that secondary, complementing the defensive line as well, and also the linebackers. So when he complements every single position on your defense and helps them out in some sort of way, I think it's a good signing.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, when I look at that signing too, I factor in one guy on the interior of that defensive line, Derek Wolfe, former Denver Bronco, one guy that really does a good job. I think depending on where you line him up, you can line him up in a 4-eye technique inside shoulder of the tackle. You can line him up in a 3, and he's going to command the attention of a tackle, guard, or a guard center, depending on where you work him out. That's going to leave more one-on-one opportunities for your pass rush to be able to get home. And I remember the days. Tamba Hali and Justin Houston together. I mean, I think that what we saw in Kansas City at one point, I think Justin Houston still has a lot to offer. And obviously he's going to a team where he can be more of a valuable asset, not only just to the team in terms of defensive productivity, but also as a guy who has that experience for those young guys to learn from. I think this is a great move for them. Now, my question to you is, when you look at this AFC North division, you look at all these teams, everybody's gotten better. I would say that everybody outside of Pittsburgh, I don't feel like Pittsburgh has gotten better or pushed the needle in comparison to the teams like the Ravens, the Bengals, or even the Browns at this point. How do you see maybe the Ravens fitting in this division as it stands right now in the preseason?
Yeah, Cody, it's going to be a tough division. And I agree. I think the teams got better in a way, but you look at Pittsburgh and they lost a lot of key pieces on defense. And is Ben Roethlisberger going to be able to hold up for another season? We don't know. We'll find out those answers soon. But I think it's going to come down to Baltimore and Cleveland. And those are two teams who I think improve their rosters in areas of weakness. Baltimore, you look at the Buffalo game, and their offensive line was one of the main reasons they lost that game. What do? They go out and sign Kevin Zeitler, Alejandro Villanueva, draft Ben Cleveland, bring in a couple guys. For Cleveland, their secondary wasn't really a strong suit for them last year. What do? They go out and they bring in John Johnson and Troy Hill. So those two teams for me are the two that I think are going to compete for the AFC North. Cincinnati, I think, is going to be great in a couple years, but they're just not there yet. I think their defense needs a bit more work, and Joe Burrow needs a bit more experience. So I think it's going to come down, the first overall pick in 2018 to the last overall pick in the first round of 2018 in Baker Mayfield versus Lamar Jackson. And those two teams, if you guys remember Week 14 of 2020, that Monday night classic game where, Lamar Jackson, Lamar Jackson comes out of the locker room and it was nonstop offense and one of the best games of the year, in my opinion. Those are the types of games I expect this year. And I don't think either team sweeps the series this year. I think both teams are just too talented, both on offense and now on defense. So for me, I have them both finishing at 13-4 with conference record being the tiebreaker. So it's that close to me. But whoever doesn't win the division out of the two teams, I don't think that means they're just an easy out in the wild card round, because they're both so talented.
Absolutely. It's going to be a ton of fun to watch that division, ton of fun to watch the Baltimore Ravens, and already a ton of fun to listen to you every Monday through Friday over on Locked On Ravens. Kevin, thank you so much for all the fantastic work. Make sure you follow Kevin on Twitter at KOStriker34. We'll be talking to you again soon here, I'm sure, buddy, because this team does not lack for headlines.
Absolutely not. Thanks so much, Ross and Cody.
See you, buddy.
That's going to be a fun division, Ross. It is. But, going back to that Lamar Jackson game, happens, baby. Ish
happens, baby. Look, there's no doubt about it. We all know what happened. Stop playing. Stop pretending. Look, I think that these Ravens are going to be a ton of fun to follow all throughout here. I agree with you. I think that at the top of this division is the Ravens and the Browns, and then I think that there's no reason to completely rule out the Pittsburgh Steelers here. I think with that defense and with them trying to revamp their run game with Najee Harris, I know that Ben Roethlisberger has his moments, but as somebody that covered a team for a long time that continued to build around an aging quarterback, and a quarterback who he himself said didn't have access to all of his facilities at certain points throughout the seasons, it is possible to continue to build a contender as long as you're able to adjust the scheme, and I trust Mike Tomlin to be able to do that. So I think this AFC North division is going to be wild, absolutely wild in 2021.
And it's going to be brutal. Like I said, I feel like in the AFC side of things, it could be either be the AFC West or the AFC North that have three teams representing in the playoffs this year from division to wild card. Everything is certainly on the table at this point, but it is going to be chaos, Ross. Hey, Ross, one quick thing I wanted to throw at you. Look, Madden's coming out here in just a few weeks, and, we see it every single year with these Madden ratings and players like, hey, but you know what? I've actually learned something new over the weekend. It's not about the overall rating. It's about those maybe position-specific traits, like for a quarterback, arm strength, accuracy. Maybe those ratings matter a little bit more. But Ross, what would you rate yourself if you were having to, be rated as a Madden player? If you were on a roster, what rating would you be aiming for?
Would I be aiming for right now, like me right now? Probably somewhere around. What's the lowest rating? Was like a 36 or something like that. I think is.
I don't know. I think the ratings go to the lowest goes to the 40s.
They're 40. Oh, maybe I'm underestimating, because I was thinking maybe there were some long snappers that were down at the bottom, because I remember long snappers oftentimes being the lowest. So I think
are people too.
I know they're people too. I want Madden to rep them the way that they deserve it to be rep, but they list them as tight ends and then build all the. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I think all I'm saying is I'm somewhere lower than a long snapper. That's all I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to get to here.
I don't know, man. I'd say the dexterity's got to be at 99. You're in the 99 club there, my man. We we bring the heat here every Sunday on Locked On NFL Sunday Live. Special shout out to our man Tony Wiggins, host of Locked On Jaguars, in the chat. I tell you what, anytime we get to talk with Tony, my cheeks hurt from laughing so much, dude. That man is funny. He's he's the perfect combination. If you throw a cat in water and you mix him with a comedian at the same time, look, he's there, man. Much love to Tony Wiggins there. But, Ross, I want to throw things to you real quick. The New Orleans Saints, we touched on it briefly a little bit earlier. Devontae Freeman, former NFC South Division rival to the Saints, and he once put out a tweet, "Aints." And, all of a sudden, Saints, the Saints fans are kind of erupting a little bit. But you look at Alvin Kamara, you look at Latavius Murray. I mean, could you see this upcoming season the Saints going with a running back by committee approach? I think Freeman, I think people forget. He was one of the most electric players in football going back to, let's say, 2016, 2017 with that Atlanta Falcons team. I mean, he was a weapon, and they were so damn good, he and Tevin Coleman together. What are the expectations here with this signing?
Well, I think that the running back by committee approach is something that wouldn't be surprising at all when it comes to the New Orleans Saints. I mean, you've seen them over the last couple of seasons. If you look back to when Alvin Kamara was drafted in 2017, they drafted Alvin Kamara when they already had Mark Ingram and Adrian Peterson on the roster. And then they ended up trading Adrian Peterson, of course, but then you saw this sort of running back tandem approach when it came to Alvin Kamara and, of course, Mark Ingram, and then eventually Alvin Kamara and Latavius Murray, as we've seen over the last couple of years. I don't look at this signing of Devontae Freeman as something that immediately threatens a player like Latavius Murray, who for me is a lock to be the second running back as long as he's still on the roster. Now, does he get traded? Does he get moved? Is he a part of a package for, a cornerback out there that the Saints could potentially be looking for? We'll see, right? All that remains to be seen. But in terms of right now, you sign a Devontae Freeman because he could potentially come in and compete to be your running back 3. I mean, he'll have to work hard to beat out Dwayne Washington, who has had just a stranglehold on that position for the past few years because of his special teams ability.
Yeah.
But right now, there's so much changing around the New Orleans Saints special teams unit because Craig Robertson is gone, Justin Hardy is gone. Some of these players that contributed there are no longer on the team, which is where you saw the salary cap situation and the drop in salary cap really affect this team. So could Devontae, could he come in and become somebody that ends up taking over that running back 3 role, especially with Ty Montgomery very likely focusing on wide receiver early on in the season as opposed to competing at RB3. So I think it's a wise move by the New Orleans Saints. We've seen them do it before. The Super Bowl year, you saw a 3 running back attack. You could certainly see it again this year, especially if Devontae Freeman is able to make that 53-man roster. I'm not saying it's going to take him to a Super Bowl, but we've seen Sean Payton be able to successfully utilize that type of a system before.
I can't wait to see Sean Payton go 40 personnel, 3-back pistol, Taysom Hill at quarterback, running back, and then you have Latavius Murray, Kamara, and then you have Freeman behind him. They're going to do a whole bunch of read option stuff. It's going to watch. It's going to happen now. And then we're going to reference back to this clip.
It's only a matter of time before Alvin Kamara throws a pass. We keep saying it. It's only a matter of time, and that would certainly help them do that. Speaking of throwing passes, as we wrap up today, I want to talk a little bit about the Denver Broncos too. We hinted at it earlier. Aaron Rodgers no longer on the market, no longer a possibility at this time for the Denver Broncos. So what does the quarterback battle look like so far through the early portions of camp? And I want to stress that. Early portions of camp, early implications on that quarterback situation.
Yeah, I mean, the situation is ongoing, Ross, and Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater, they've been exchanging, getting first-team reps. Drew Lock got day 1's first reps. Teddy Bridgewater had day 2's. They've just been rotating there. And Drew Lock right now, people are keeping track. Drew Lock's ahead right now, and it really goes off of yesterday's practice at the UCL Training Center as the NFL welcomed fans back to football all across the NFL and training camps. The Broncos had around 2.2 thousand fans in attendance at camp. Very fun to see. But Teddy Bridgewater had a rough day in practice yesterday. He threw 3 interceptions. 2 of them were tipped at the line of scrimmage. Kareem Jackson made a fantastic play on 1. But the Broncos quarterback so far, Teddy's made the most mistakes, and that all happened yesterday. Before yesterday's practice, Drew Lock and Teddy Bridgewater both sat at 0 interceptions combined. Teddy now has 3. Drew Lock has yet to throw an interception in practice. He came close to Trey Marshall, but outside of that, yesterday he was very efficient, going 12 of 15 in the passing periods, and he's taken shots downfield. So his decision-making so far in camp has been good. He's got the advantage right now. Now, tomorrow's practice on Monday, I want to be able to see if Drew Lock can maybe build on that. If he can have another good day, and if Teddy struggles, you might have a little bit of a leeway there in determining, okay, more than likely it's going to be Drew Lock who could win the quarterback competition. But Broncos head coach Vic Fangio has pointed out there is no quarterback that's really gained separation just yet. They don't want to force the decision to happen. They want to let it happen organically. So
Absolutely.
While Teddy had a rough day on Saturday, that is no indication that he has lost this competition. He's still going to have a chance because guess what, Ross? The pads haven't even come on yet, and quarterbacks aren't going to get hit anyways. And if they did, someone's not going to be on the roster anymore if you hit the quarterback. So I want to see how things go. Now, something to keep an eye on next week. I'm looking forward to talk with our good friend Luke Braun, host of Locked On Vikings, one of the Locked On NFL hosts throughout the weekday alongside yourself. They're going to have joint training camp practices next week, not this week, but next week in Minnesota leading up to the Broncos-Vikings first preseason game on August 14th. So that, I think, is when you really make those evaluating factors. How do they do against somebody that is not their own team, that, has seen the same formations and that knows maybe what play is coming? To me, I think that's where it gets dicey. I think that's where you really have to evaluate a lot more. And if one of those quarterbacks can separate themselves against another team, it makes your decision a lot easier as an organization.
Absolutely. Everything changes when the pads come on and you're not looking at the same person across the line of scrimmage you've been looking at for the past
What did Bill Belichick
days.
say this week? The most important thing about the most important part of football is the actual football part, man. True words have never been spoken. I'm going to get that made into a shirt because it is true, man. But yeah, the pads don't lie. Look, and that's the thing too. The NFL, the NFLPA, the new CBA, there are certain limitations in terms of overall contact. So NFL teams have to monitor that. But that's when you really get to evaluate stuff. You can't really get a good tell specifically when your offensive linemen are lined up. You got a right tackle, and then all of a sudden you got a pass rusher, but you don't have pads on. I mean, you can't get a real determining factor there because you can't touch anybody. and you don't want to. So you want to be able to see what happens when the Pats come on. But that's going to happen this week, Ross, and I am stoked for it, my friend.
Cannot wait. We're going to have a ton of updates next Sunday, as Cody and I will be back to keep you up to date with everything going on around the NFL. We'll have training camp, and we'll also have a game to talk about Thursday night, August 5th. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Dallas Cowboys getting ready for that Hall of Fame game. And, of course, we get the Hall of Fame inductions this coming weekend as well. So a ton for us to catch you up on. So make sure you come back here on Sunday for another episode of Locked On NFL Sunday, hosted by Cody Roark at Cody Roark NFL, and myself, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola, here every Sunday. Cody, always a pleasure to be here with you, my friend.
Always great to be here with you, Ross, and I can't wait to bring NFL fans daily content, obviously across the Locked On NFL network, but even on Sundays, folks, pregame shows, all football talk, no fluff. You get it here, the Locked On NFL Sunday live show with our local experts.